operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gator Truth. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the Gators' final 4 games of the season against Ole Miss, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Florida State. It's going to be an interesting discussion as all 4 teams really have a lot of turnover, or at least one side of the ball has a ton of turnover. And so really a lot of similarities between those teams, but it's also an interesting time as it is the last 4 games of the season. Before we begin, I do want to tell you, if you're listening to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, be sure to subscribe, be sure to leave a review if you can. And then if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like, subscribe. We are trying to get to 500 subscribers on YouTube this season. The earlier, the better, for sure. Do that for us. And also, feel free to leave comments. And I would say, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or if you're watching us on YouTube, go to our YouTube page, YouTube/@GatorTruth, and leave a comment about what you believe the Gators record will be. And then I'm also asking if you've got any ideas for a piece of game day content that hopefully I can do. Leave those in the comment section as well. In the past, I've had different things, like on the YouTube page, I have a short of DJ Lagway's first passing touchdown at Florida. I also have, a video of DJ Lagway last year greeting players as they came out onto the field for the LSU game. And I thought that was a great moment of leadership. Videos like that are some things I do, but if there's things you'd like to see, whether it's things at home or if it's things that are away, maybe you want to see something at Texas A&M, or you want to see something at LSU. If there's something I can do, leave that in the comment section. If you are watching this because you're a Vol or Null or Wildcat or Rebel, you're watching this and you're like, man, I don't like what you got to say, feel free to put that in the comment section. I try to answer every comment. Just be civil is something I ask of you. But with that said, thanks everyone for checking us out. Be sure to check out as well the interviews I have with opposing podcasters on our YouTube page, starting with Texas. We've got currently posted Texas through Ole Miss on Sunday as I'm recording this. So Sunday, August 24th, we'll release Tennessee. It's about an hour-long conversation with my buddy Skylar from Vol Fanatics. Let me come on his Vol Navy boat last year and pregame with him, tailgate a little bit on a boat, which was really, really cool. And then my friend Jesse, who's been on the show a few times from Plant and Spear, will come out on Tuesday, a conversation about FSU. With that said, let's go ahead, let's get into it and talk about the first game, and that is the Gators at Kentucky. Now, the last 2 games, Florida lost in Lexington, of course. Back in 2021, Florida loses a close one, and Dan Mullen's seen smiling after the game, going to do the post-game handshake. Not the best look, and definitely did not endear him to a lot of people. And then there was a game that did not endear Billy Napier to a lot of people, and that's getting blown out 2 years ago in 2023 in a noon game. I don't think that'll be the result this year. We'll get into that a little bit. Part of that is there was a massive roster turnover after a 4-8 season last year for the Wildcats, 1-7 in the SEC. Randomly, that one was Ole Miss, a team that ended up 9-3, and 2 of those losses were Florida and Kentucky. If they win one of those 2, they're probably in the playoffs. But now Florida has Kentucky after the week after Georgia, going to Lexington in November, something that Gators have not done in a long, long time. But I do not think that this is really the best Kentucky team. Just a little bit of context for this Kentucky team as well. And that's They play Texas, Tennessee, and Auburn back to back to back before we come to town, where we have a Mississippi State bye week, Georgia 3 weeks before we go to Lexington. So I do think that favors the Gators. If you have listened to or watched the interview with Jay from Religiously Kentucky, he talks about this roster, massive turnover, lots of transfers come in, hoping to help Kentucky. And that's really what I see. An interesting note is Jalen Farmer and former All-SEC offensive lineman, preseason All-SEC offensive lineman Josh Braun might make up the right side of Kentucky's offensive line. Of course, both of those guys were Dan Mullen recruits. I believe both were Dan Mullen. I know Josh Braun was to UF before transferring out. Braun, of course, transferring to Arkansas, and then now at Kentucky, Jalen Farmer transferring to Kentucky. So it's an interesting matchup there. Hard to say really what's going on. Kentucky losing their top receivers, top running back. But on defense, they do have experience returning in the linebacker room, in the defensive backfield. However, that defensive line made up of transfers, a lot of offensive line receivers, again, transfers. So it's hard to say how this will be, but I will say if Kentucky can go from a 4-8 team to being able to beat the most stacked Gator team in a long, long time as far as talent, then we've got big issues. This is one that I do think the Gators should win, not just on talent alone, but I do think that this is a situation where the Gators, by having talent and the continuity, things we've talked about all the previous episodes, this one should be a win. Speaking of massive roster turnover, let's talk about Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss talked with Zach from the Rebel Walk. He talked about how they have roughly 18 new starters, and of course, part of those, a lot of those starters, like Jackson Dart, like Trey Moore and others, have gone on to the NFL. Former Gator Princely, man, he's gone. It's funny enough, his brother Prince Will transferred in, and he's now taking over Princely's spot. Austin Simmons takes over at QB. He was okay in what limited action he had last year. Former Gator commit Austin Simmons, and then he switched over to Ole Miss. So it'll be interesting. I do have to say, talking about 18 potential new stars, not to mention some depth that's coming in from the portal. But Caden Lee, one of their receivers, does return 874 yards in 2024. So it's not like there's not some production coming back. Currently, one of their main running backs I saw averaging 15 yards per carry in 2024. Now, before you get too excited, he only had one carry, but it went for 15 yards. So I can say they had a guy who's averaging 15 yards per carry, and now he's looking to be a major contributor in the run game for the Rebels. And they also have Perkins coming back at like the end linebacker spot, kind of like how Florida has that, tweening outside linebacker end spot. He's coming back, had 10.5 sacks in 2024, tied for the team lead with Princely, as we said. And so does bring that experience, and linebacker Daughtery does come back second in tackles on this Rebel team in 2024. So there is some experience coming back, but outside of that, almost every starter that I've not named is going to be a transfer in. I don't think the Rebels in year one of Austin Simmons, and I could be wrong, with a whole bunch of transfers, are going to be where they were last year. Now, if you had listened to the interview with Zach talked about how they still think they should make the playoffs this year, and I love that mentality. So we'll see what happens. I do want to note that this is the 6th game in a row for the Rebels before they play Florida. It's one of only 4 teams who have a 6-game streak or 6 straight games in the SEC this year. The ones that do have a 6-game streak are actually some of the lower in the conference. So it's kind of weird that Ole Miss is the one who isn't. And by 6-game streak, we're talking about Vanderbilt, who, funny enough, the 6th team they face is Alabama. We're talking about Kentucky. Florida faces them number 4 out of a 7-game streak. And I believe, of course, we talked about Ole Miss, and then Mississippi State has a 6-game stretch before a bye week before they come to Gainesville. So just an interesting thing I saw when I was looking at these schedules is that it's a 6-game in a row. Now, I'm not going to lie. The game 5 is against, I believe, the Citadel. Yes, it is. But we're talking about games 1, 2, 3, and 4 being Washington State, at Georgia, at Oklahoma, then having South Carolina, who looks to be pretty decent, and then the Citadel. So, yes, they kind of get a lower intensity week before Florida, but that's still 5 games of taxing on the body, no bye week in there. So something I think with the massive turnover, I do think this is a lean for Florida. Again, as we've said, with all these road games, it does depend on if Billy Napier can be a winning team on the road, something he's not accomplished the first 3 years. I think this is one he should get done, especially given all the situations, but again, remains to be seen. I would also give Lane Kiffin a lot of credit if he were to make this Ole Miss team a 9-10 win team with the massive roster turnover that they have coming into the season and somewhat of the schedule that they have as well. And then finally, one of the most fun 2-game homestands in quite a while, and that is Tennessee and FSU back-to-back in the Swamp, both home games surrounding Thanksgiving. I don't know if there's much greater. Now, with that said, we have had Tennessee and Florida State back-to-back home games before 2001. We don't need to talk about that, but that was Florida State, then Tennessee. This is the opposite way, and it's actually scheduled this way. No one has been rescheduled. And so Tennessee is interesting because the offense returns basically nobody. And you'll hear if you listen to the interview with Skyler, the conversation that we have, he'll talk about how this offense, there's a lot of hope for it, but you're missing your starting QB from last year. Of course, that's Nico Iamaleava, who left and transferred after getting into an NIL dispute. Lots of respect for Tennessee for letting him walk instead of giving in to his demands, because once you give in to those demands, everyone else is going to make demands, and where does it stop? So letting him walk, bring in Joey Aguilar technically from UCLA, but he had just transferred to UCLA in the spring, did the spring, left UCLA for Tennessee. Before all that was at App State. Running back, one of the top, if not the top running backs last year in the SEC, Dylan Sampson, he's gone from Tennessee. Multiple high quality receivers, Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, who transferred to FSU, is out. Now you're relying on a bunch of less proven guys. Your top receivers are gone. I believe your tight end is gone. 4 starting offensive linemen are gone, and I'm pretty sure one of their guys they're relying on. Again, watch the conversation when it comes out with Skyler. I'm pretty sure one of those is a true freshman that they're going to be relying on this season. With that said, Heupel has adjusted his scheme in the past to kind of fit his personnel, which I think is a good sign of any great offensive mind to know, hey, maybe I don't have the best tight ends to run 12 personnel. Maybe I should focus more on a great receiving room. I'm not implying anything, just throwing that out there as an example. But with that said, Heupel has adjusted the scheme in the past, so we'll see how that works out with Aguilar and the rest of the team. Now, one thing you also hear in that conversation with Skylar is we talk about how where you might be returning 2 starters, so maybe the tight end does return, but up to 2 starters on the offense. Well, the defense is returning 9 starters, returns almost everyone from a pretty good defense last year. And of course, all that continuity will probably be a better defense. Skylar and I kind of disagreed on this point and somewhat agreed on it, and you'll see, and that's Tennessee. I think early the goal may be to just try and win ugly, use that defense to keep teams below, 17 or less, and then hope to get up to 20, 21, 24 points and pull out the win. And who knows, maybe this offense will be great, but if not, try relying on what you believe the strength will be and go from there. And it'll be very interesting. Tennessee, I believe, starts with Syracuse. Syracuse, of course, beat Miami last year, but I think they've also had massive roster turnover themselves. Hard to say where I see this Tennessee team because they're replacing a ton on offense. This could be a team that's completely great. This could be a Will Muschamp early MAC years or all the MAC years where your offense is pedestrian, but you've got a great defense that keeps you into every game, even if your offense is not great. So it'll be interesting. But I will say this, it's been 22 years since the Gators have lost to Tennessee in the Swamp. This is a year, as long as both teams are decently healthy, I think the Gators should pull out another win and extend the streak even further, but not one to really overlook, but just based on the situation and this being a home game, it should be a Gator win. Now, a joke that I've had with Skylar and Michael from Vol Fanatics, he and I did a thing for their channel a few months ago, is that Tennessee has a bye week, New Mexico State, and Florida. We talked about how, in a way, this sets up as the perfect time for Tennessee to break this streak. But as they put it, their battered Vol syndrome will not let them believe in a win until they see it. And to be honest, I'm not sure I see it this year for the Vols, but you never know. We'll see it. We'll see what happens as we move forward for sure. And then, of course, the season finale, Florida State coming to the Swamp. Massive roster turnover. I mean, if you pull up their depth chart online, it is a ridiculous amount of transfers they have coming in. A good conversation again with my friend Jesse about all the turnover and how they think that'll help Florida State get better than the 2-10 last year. And they're hoping for like a 9-3, 8-4 season. They come to Florida after a long stretch themselves, and part of that long stretch is they're going to be facing NC State at Carter Finley Stadium. And that is a place that FSU has had trouble for years and years. They're going to be facing them the Friday before they come to Florida, so they do have an extra day of rest, but they do have a somewhat big game the week before they come to the Swamp. Big news for Florida State this year. And of course, this news actually broke before the Florida State game for Florida last year at Doak Campbell Stadium. And that's Gus Malzahn stepped down at UCF and took the job as offensive coordinator with the Seminoles. And then a former quarterback of his who left UCF, went to Boston College, is now the quarterback at FSU, and that is Castellanos, who, again, we talked about it. Some of you may or may not know. Oh, look, thunder. Some of you may or may not know. He basically said how he's coming for Bama in week 1, and I do ask Jesse about that in our conversation. But with that said, it will be an interesting thing to see whether this rebuilt Florida State offense and again stole Squirrel White from Tennessee and see how good this offense can be. Of course, we all know Florida State's had ups and downs the last few seasons. Mixed results the first few years of Mike Norvell, and then, of course, shot up 2023, had that 12-0 season, got blown out in the bowl game, come back last year, and then end up with a 2-10 record. Still don't know how the two teams they beat, well, at least one of them, how they lost to that Florida State team. I believe it was Cal that I was really surprised at. But either way, just it's one of those things, like I said with Mark Stoops, if you can take a 4-8 Kentucky and make it so good it's beating Florida, again, assuming all things being equal and we don't have like a 2013 everyone's injured situation, it would be ridiculous for Florida to lose this game if Mike Norvell can, totally turn around in 1 year. So he's winning in the Swamp in the season finale against what is your best team on paper in years. So this is one I would predict Florida should win, and I don't feel bad saying this is a should. Now, should and will are two different words, and we'll have to see when it gets closer exactly where the Gators are and where Florida State is, because maybe they do make this massive turnaround, or maybe they're a 6 to 8 win team, and that's something that Florida should, again, all things being equal, should take care of. And with that said, I've said the Gators should start 4-0. I feel pretty good saying, based on things like Kentucky massive turnover, Ole Miss massive turnover, Tennessee turnover and at home, and Florida State turnover and at home and being bad last year. Same with Kentucky. That the first four and the final four, the Gators should being the key word, win, and that should be 8 wins for Florida. So if I'm predicting 8 wins for Florida out of those games, what exactly do I think my prediction will be? Well, my prediction, that's a great question. I've said on paper, Florida should probably pull out 8 games, 9 games with Mississippi State, and then snag at least one of the Texas A&M, and Georgia trilogy. With that said, I don't see the Gators going 10-2 as much as I'd love to see it. I do think that is unlikely, but I'll be happily wrong with that. I do see Florida dropping one of these games. I don't think they should drop, especially on the road. I'd hate to lose to LSU. It is a tough environment. In fact, I ranked, and I'll probably drop a short on what I believe are, ranking our games from least tough to toughest. LSU I actually have at number 3, despite all the turnover I think they have, how I think our defensive line could take advantage of a poor offensive line, or a inexperienced together offensive line, I should say, at LSU. And so LSU for me, number 3, that might be something that we drop, even though I don't like it. So I'm going to say, and again, this is me being more positive. I know some people are like, no, we're not going to do it. I will predict 9-3. I do think you've got to get to at least 9-3 this year and get to a 10th win with a bowl game. Lots to talk about whether Florida would get to the playoff with a 9-3 record. There are so many variables, such as what do the 10-2 or better teams look like? What do our wins and losses look like? If I'm right, and games 1-4 and 9-12 are against teams that I see as 8-win max right now, and that includes LSU, because I think LSU could lose to Florida, Alabama, A&M, and Clemson, or they could lose to Ole Miss. Like, there's a lot of things. these 8-win teams, are those quality enough for the Gators getting with 9 wins if they do take care of business on the front end, back end, if they're all 8-win teams, and of course, Mississippi State? Or if you lose to, let's say, an LSU, but you pull off a win at Texas A&M, which I believe is the hardest game because it's on the road against a team that has a lot of continuity. If you pulled that off, that might be the big win you need. Or we could just mix and match. Who knows? But I do think this year you've got to get to 9 wins through the regular season, and at least 9 wins. And I do think you've got to get a 10th with the bowl win. I've talked before. Go back 30 years. Find me a team that's taken 5+ years to get to 10 wins. That's won a national title. And a lot of those teams that ended up pulling it off could not use the portal to switch out the players they don't want to the players they did. They won with the players they had. Now we're with the players we wanted. We've got a ton of experience. If there's a time, the time is now. Lots of turnover for UF coming in the next year or two, especially on this offensive line. So again, got to get there now. I will predict we get to that 9-3. Hopefully we get better. Hopefully we see the Gators in the playoffs, and hopefully we get to a playoff game. With that said, again, post your record prediction below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to this wherever you get your podcasts, go to YouTube/@GatorTruth, subscribe, and leave a comment on what you think our record will be, and then also leave a comment on one piece of game day content that hopefully I can give you. I can't get into the locker room. I can't get on the field. So let's go ahead and at least have those barriers now. It's going to be a fun season. Next week, we'll start off with our game day our game previews with Long Island. It's going to be a fun week. We're basically here at game week. I cannot wait for the 2025 Florida Gator football season. Stick with it with me. We're here. Let's have some fun because football season goes by so quickly. And with that said, thank you all for listening. And as always, go Gators.